What am I saying again?
This is MPW.
MPW.
The podcast.
With your host,
Xylo Aria. Cool.
A podcast about music production
the everyday musician.
where we learn from experienced studio engineers and each other.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the MPW Podcast. I'm your host, Xylo Aria, and today I'm here with our special guest, Charlie Andrew. So Charlie is a music producer and also a mixing engineer, and he's won a Mercury Prize and also been awarded the MPG Breakthrough Producer of the Year, and has produced artists like Alt J and worked with Matt Corby and many more. So thanks so much for being here today, Charlie.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. So it's morning there for you, or afternoon, I think. And how's it been so far?
So far, so good. Actually, the sun has been shining quite a bit. So believe it or not. So at least it can sort of. I've just bought a new house, which is lovely, and it has a garden, so I'm able to be outside. Thank you very much. Thank you. So actually, the timing of this is quite good. I can actually sort of get used to the house and do some DIY.
Yeah, that's really good. I actually moved not too long ago from London back to Melbourne, and it's been quite nice in the sense that here there's a backyard as well, and compared to my small flat in London, it's a good place to be. So
nice. Yes. No, you need some outdoor space, definitely.
yeah, that's it. So today we will be talking about mixing. Before we get into our topic, though, I wanted to talk to you about your journey into mixing and production and where it all started for you and how you got to where you are today.
Right. Okay. Wow. I mean, I suppose, where do I start? Basically, I've always wanted to be in production, and production and mixing for me overlap massively. I think quite a lot of my sort of production ideas come out in my sort of, or appear as I'm tackling a mix, if that makes sense.
Really?
Yeah, I think so sometimes. Yeah, I think sometimes it's not just mixing for me, hasn't just been about choosing the right compressor and an EQ. Sometimes I'm just exploring how something sits in a mix, and I'll end up sort of, adding quite an interesting effect or something. And to me, those are the things, that's production, because that can really change the color of something massively, rather than it just being sort of, they sit right together, So I think there's a massive sort of overlap between the two things sometimes. I mean, I'm aware I'm not really answering your question right now. I probably sort of moved ahead about 4 or 5 questions, but so I'll come back to that. But yeah, there is an overlap. But so bottom line is, I mean, when I started at school, I wanted to be involved in music in some way. I was a bit of a geek. I was very much into physics and stuff like that, as well as, played several instruments and stuff. And I was extremely, extremely lucky when I left school in that I wrote a letter to the wrong person who worked at Abbey Road. He was the guy called Neil Aldridge. He was the head of technical there. He wasn't the studio manager who everyone else was writing to, and correctly, rightly so. I sort of wrote to the wrong person. Just so happened when my letter arrived on his desk, he was actually acting as a studio manager that day because Colette had gone on holiday. And because he doesn't receive letters like that, sort of asking for a job with CVs and whatnot, he actually opened it and read it. And that afternoon, he called me in because he needed a runner. So,
oh my God.
I know, it's kind of mad. So, but he just needed a runner for 2 weeks, and I came in and did that. And then that ended up for me being there a whole sort of, I was there for about 2 years, but over a period of 4 years. I don't know if that makes any sense, but in between those 2 years that I was there, I went and studied at university, music and sound recording. Mm-hmm. And so my time at Abbey Road and my degree course, they complemented each other perfectly. After that, I was in a band. We were just on the London sort of gig scene, really, or the UK scene, trying to make it. We didn't make any money out of it, but it was a lot of fun and sort of set me up well. And in that period, I just basically, a lot of my production sort of, I don't know, skills or whatever skill set that I don't know what you want to call it, but it's sort of self-taught really, just in that period, just recording my own band, chatting with the other guys in the band who all came from a similar background to me anyway by that point. we all, just taking on board other people's ideas. And that's a massive part of my job. Is I really do not want to be, a dictator in the room. I may or may not be right, but you have to listen to everyone else's ideas in the room, and quite often they could really be onto something, and it has to be explored. And that's what I find so much fun working with other people, because they can open your eyes up to something you never even thought of, and vice versa. So that period working with the band really helped that, and open my mind to that. And I had a sort of warehouse space that I was renting dirt cheap in Shoreditch in London, where I could just record for free, really. Well, people didn't pay me. I was just, I'd meet a band or an artist on the circuit that I was playing on, and invite them to make a track with me, And I had a very sort of basic Pro Tools LE sort of system. Yeah. But there was a lot of soul to the building we were in, and obviously relatively central London, making as much noise as we could, wanted to, and that was a real asset. But to actually pay the bills, I was teaching the drums at the time, just to kind of make sure I had some cash. But that just sort of seemed to blossom a little bit. And then I got together a kind of show reel, and I did a gig one night, and this guy starts talking to me at the bar, and I sort of didn't really want to sort of chat. I just played a gig, and I just wanted to buy a pint. And but we got talking, and anyway, long story short, he about a week later introduced me to who is now my manager, and then about a week after that said an old friend of his from school was just started a band at uni. Here's their demo. What do you think? Sent it to me. I absolutely loved it. Invited them down to the warehouse. We started doing the recording process, like I just described, and that band was Alt J. So it sort of just blossomed from there, basically, and Gareth, my manager's also opened some other doors. I've had the great pleasure of working alongside Clive Langer quite a lot. He's become a really, really dear friend of mine and a real mentor of mine, and he's quite a legendary sort of producer. He worked with Bowie, Dexys Midnight Runners, Madness, all these people. And just to be alongside him and be his sort of engineer at the time, just opened my mind, my ears to different ways of thinking, and just also to give me the confidence that I, on so many levels, knew what I was doing, just because until that point, you don't have, any sort of tried, and I didn't have anything out, no releases properly. Yeah, so that was basically how it all began. So from there, I've just been sort of just absorbing what I can from, around me, and keep listening to things and getting new ideas wherever I can, but essentially just sort of self-taught. And so that's how my career began.
Awesome. That's really cool. Like I asked this question of all our guests, and it's really interesting how the stories are so different. And someone was talking about this on the last episode about how there's no clear-cut path into this profession, and everyone just has a completely different way into it, and it's really interesting to hear how everyone kind of gets to where they are.
100%. There is no formula, no rule. Everyone has their own like you say, their own path to get to where they've got to. And I've been asked to go back to my old uni several times to sort of basically tell my story, because obviously at that point they're getting a degree and hoping there is a formula. And I think the bottom line is you do not know which doors are going to open for you. You just need to be in it to win it. You just have to try. And any opportunity comes your way, you take it and give it a go. You don't know where it's going to lead, basically. That's the bottom line.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that's such good advice. And I think something that is relevant to everything, really.
Yeah,
everything you do.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, cool. So, so today we're talking about mixing, and one thing we do is define the topic in one sentence. So how would you define mixing? Oh, okay.
So
I see you pull up a diagram. Is that?
No, it's not a diagram.
Is that what that is?
I just sort of wrote out a few words, and I don't know if these even make sense or even the best way of putting it. But to me, I put it's the balancing of recorded parts in order to make them work in the best way possible to create one whole piece of audio.
Cool. I think that sounds really good.
But there's a little caveat to that, is that the best way is subjective. There's not one way to do it, really. So, and herein, that's where the dilemma with mixing starts, is that there's never one way to tackle the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, so many times the answers to questions I received has been, it depends. And
Yeah.
I feel like I might get a few of those from you today, Charlie.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Yeah. No, cool. I think that's a really good start and a good kind of quick summary into what mixing is. But I guess through this episode we'll go through the steps that you generally take, and that will kind of help us define that a bit more. So where does it all start for you, and do you have a kind of set process that you go through every time?
If I'm not, the sort of is, but it's basically most of the time I'm mixing something that I've been working on myself as in the production realm anyway. So like I was alluding to before, I think the two overlap massively. So as I'm tracking, as I'm creating parts, like the idea is how they're all going to sit together in the final product. And so that you're kind of doing those things as you go. And my main thing that I really try to keep in mind is that when you're not thinking about mixing, quite often that's where the real sort of magic in the performances and whatever's happening in the room with you and the artist or the band, whatever.
Yeah.
You're not thinking about like, should there be a little bit more 3 key or K on that vocal, or should there be a bit more of this or that? You're just absorbing the soul of whatever it is you're tracking down, and that excitement that you felt at that moment, that is what I'm trying to log in my head. That's what I'm trying to remember, why it was that we were all feeling that. And because, I mean, anyone would tell you, you listen to something over and over and over again, sometimes you can't tell if it's good or bad or whatever it is after a whole day. You're just like, I do not know what I'm listening to anymore.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It sounds ironic because I've been listening to it all day, but you can't tell. So like it's so important to remember what the soul of the material is, not get absorbed in minutiae of, tiny bit, fraction of a dB more or this or whatever. For me anyway, I just think if you overthink that stuff, even the smallest little nudges on those areas can somehow take away whatever magic was happening before. So a lot of it I'm thinking about as I'm tracking, as I'm just trying to absorb, like, does that work with that? Does that work with that? And a lot of that actually is, again, production ideas rather than conventional thought process of mixing. I mean, the mixing process can, be quite easily labeled as like, right, here's a production, now it goes off to be mixed. And I'll be honest, there's a lot of that happens now in my career. And sometimes, like, it's nice, if a third party can lend their ears over something that you've done, but just almost like a pre-master. Just for me, I just love it when the little bits of the minutiae can be. Maybe, I don't know if it's like I've just alluded to, I can drive myself insane doing those sort of things.
Yeah.
So it's quite nice sometimes because, I'm a producer first and foremost. It's quite nice to have that other opinion, but without losing the soul, and that I can liaise with that person. Do you know what I mean? But when I'm mixing myself, the bottom line is I need to then, to be able to do that by myself, I need to get space from the track. And quite often the very first thing that comes to my mind on my first listen of the day is the most prominent, most significant mix change that I do. Because I just instantly, you can just fresh ears, you just go, that's clearly what's happening is the bass is too loud or whatever it is. And by the end of the day, your ears have kind of gone a bit numb to bass or whatever. So you can't tell. I find I've sometimes, if it's getting near towards the end of the day and I find myself going, do you know what? I really need to turn up the X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. I really have to just slap myself in the wrist and go, you haven't thought this all day. So it's probably because your ears are tired that you're doing it now. So taking regular gaps, and it's taking, do a bit of short stint, get some time away from it, have a cup of tea, have a sandwich, come back, those sort of things. That is probably actually the most significant lesson that I can sort of relay to you on this. Obviously there's some technical stuff we could talk about, but that to me is the psychology of mixing is endless, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point, I guess, and where the process is a bit different depending on if you're producing the track and mixing it, as opposed to
Yes.
if you've come in as a mix engineer and you haven't had anything to do with the creation of the track.
This episode is brought to you by Devious Machines. Did you know that with the new Infiltrator plugin, you can turn this sound into this sound? This is a great way to add depth and width to your synths and pads in your latest track. Head over to our Instagram page at Music Production for Women to find out how you could win this cool new plugin for free.
So things like, EQ and compression and all that kind of thing, is that something you're doing as you're producing then, or do you kind of not worry about that too much and then get into that a bit later?
I am thinking about it as we go, yeah. And then so quite often, like, I'll have a think about once some parts are down, like how I want the overall color of the track to be, for want of a better, description. It's like, saying overall color is like, I just want it to sound more blue. I don't know what the hell does that mean? That's subjective. But like, but you do know what I mean. In that, do I want it to sound like old school? It's got no top end on it, or do I want it to sound really bright and punchy? Like a real modern, that sort of thing. Little bits of that can be done. I think if you just overall want a little bit of a top lift on the track or something, obviously you can do that on the mix bus. I mean, that's something I do, not to horrendous amounts, but like just to give it a little bit of top lift or whatever it may be, or overall compression. So as I'm starting to build these tracks, I will plonk a few things on just to make sure that those parts are going to work.
Yeah.
Or in hand with what I have in mind overall, and vice versa. Does that, So I will dip that in, see if it's working, take it out again to carry on tracking. But so yeah, I'm keeping it all in mind as I go.
And if you were coming in just as a mixing engineer, is there a way that you kind of set up your projects before you get going, or is that different depending on the project?
The main thing is keeping headroom, I'd say. It's very easy to just like start a new session, all the faders at 0, and if you've tracked everything, I don't know, like you can end up just pumping the mix bus quite hard. And certainly in the digital realm, that, because Pro Tools or whatever, they're all designed now to kind of take it to a point, in effect, have a kind of like, as if you've just got a limiter over the mix bus. And like sometimes you'll be turning something up and it's just not getting louder as much as like you want it to. And actually, if you've not been keeping track of your headroom, it's just because you're just pushing it harder into a brick wall. So, the number one is to get your gain structure right, basically. Make sure that you've got, your mix bus is peaking at a place where you think it should be. And then you can start moving the balance around, knowing that it's not being messed around with because you're clipping the mix bus.
Yeah. No, fair enough. So I guess you kind of start with the gain then.
Yeah, start with the gain, and again, and also just listen to if I've received a project from someone else, like another producer, and I'm purely the mixer. I think it's so important to listen to their reference mix, absorb that, just sit with it for a bit. Maybe don't even listen to it in your studio, listen to it in your headphones going for a walk. Just to kind of, there's a balance, because if you listen to something too much, you grow to love it or like it the way it is, and you don't do anything to it. But you just to absorb what it is what could you do to bring this out of itself a bit more? Just to make it fulfill its full potential is basically what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And like I was alluding to before, sometimes if I'm on a project and I don't have time to like mix it inverted commas myself to the final level, it'll go off to someone else. And the last thing I want them to do is to kind of like completely change it and take parts out. And it's like, no, that I've produced this track. I want it to sound like this. Just want it to be a little bit more defined, or just like pop out the radio a bit more, or whatever it may be. And that's very subtle things. And that's a really, really dark art, I think, to kind of to do that, because it's very tempting when you've got it all in front of you, to all these toys to play with, to go, oh, bit of this, bit of that. I want to really show my worth, or whatever it is, or really dig in. And there's a tendency to, as a producer myself, to kind of feel like, oh well, like maybe this sound would sound better if it had a phaser all over it. I don't know, whatever. Do you know?
Yeah.
But it's that's not necessarily, at that stage, is not your job. Your job is to kind of just make everything pop out a bit more and sort of sit better.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I feel like that's happened to me quite a few times, where I've kind of given my mix, and then someone's come back being like, "Oh, I've added this cool delay here and something else there," and I'm like, that was just not meant to be there, and and that
exactly
that can
you never
be
asked for that.
Yeah, and that can be frustrating as a producer and an artist. But, on the other hand, sometimes, as a mixing engineer, I guess it could get exciting. You'd be like, oh, this could make it sound a lot better. But that's very true. And at the end of the day, I think it's important to remember, I guess, as a mixing engineer, it's kind of a different job to what you're doing as a producer.
Also, communication, though, is key. Like you say, sometimes in the past I've learned that, when I very first started, I was a bit naive to it all. Like, a label will go, oh, we're going to get so-and-so to mix it. I was like, oh, okay, if you insist. And there's this assumption that they'll just... Also, actually, I want sometimes from like, well, I'm just not going to say anything. Let's see what this guy does bring back. And then if it's nothing like then you've got to kind of go back through the process of like, look, can you just take off that new delay? Can you just make it sound like mine, please? Now I've learned from that. It's just, you just need to communicate with the guy first, whoever's doing it, just is, I don't want this. I want this. I've done this on purpose. Then, so there's a reason why. So don't change it, please. Exactly. So that communication is key. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For someone that has produced the track themselves, as opposed to sending something off to a mix, what would you say are the main kind of benefits of mixing yourself, as opposed to the benefits of getting someone else involved?
So the benefits of doing it yourself rather than getting someone else involved? Well, just precisely that. You avoid someone trying to chuck on their own artistic spin that you haven't asked for. And then, sometimes, that communication, they might not understand what you're trying to communicate to them. I mean, obviously that's part of your job, is to try and get that through as clearly as possible. But sometimes people just aren't on the same wavelength as you. It doesn't mean there's the right or wrong way, whatever. It just means, that communications, for some reason, is not as effortless as it can be with other people. And I think that's true in life, isn't it? There's people that I love working with, and the main reason is because we communicate so well. I've got an amazing assistant called Katie. She's incredible ears. In fact, someone who I'm now starting to use to mixing, for mixing for me, And it sort of comes, but she's learning. She's definitely got a way to go, some experience to get, but she's got great ears, and that's the bottom line, is that I can communicate with her very well, and she seems to understand when I say I want it to be more blue. She knows what I mean, and that's kind of like, that's invaluable, really. So, but if you don't have someone like that, then that's why it's probably better just to do it yourself. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, really.
No, it does, and I think a lot of people probably experience that frustration before finding the right person to work with, and like finding the right mixing engineer, it can be a lot of things involved, right price, and are they kind of understanding what it is you're trying to communicate, and it can be a personality thing as well. So there's so many different aspects to that. So it's kind of juggling that. Yeah. Or kind of trying to do it yourself, but obviously you might not have the expertise at whatever stage you're at. But that makes sense. So when you get your stems for a project that you're mixing, do you just talk me through your workflow of what you would do with them?
So quite often it's sort of common to get, start off with the actual stems that have been bounced from the production itself. In effect, like we were saying before, you're moving on someone's mix. They've got it to a certain point. You're moving it on from there. I think that's important. Assuming the producer wants you to do that, or they might just go, look, I haven't thought about mix at all.
Yeah.
So it all sounds like garbage. So please make it all sound better. But like quite often, things like the drums or whatever will be considered to a point. There'll be an effect on them that should be in there. So sort of you can take the stems, but also it's important to ask for I like to get the breakdown of those stems. So there'll be a stem session. Or just a folder full of stems, which I'll import into, I'm a Pro Tools user, so into tools, but also access to their multi-track session so that I can, if I go, look, I'm not really digging how this stem is working, I need to go back into it and break it down. I can just import that and sort of break it down further if need be. But I have in front of me laid bare how that was constructed by the producer, so I can keep that in mind and keep the elements of it that I think, and they think, need to be retained. But they may have just done something a bit funky with the EQ or something that I just no other way about it. I need to go back in and change it. So basically, it's making sure I think a tidy mix or a mix that can be easier is as long as the whole session in front of you is tidy. Is a massive thing. It's like walking into a tidy house. It's really quite nice. I mean, it is for me anyway.
Yeah.
And if your life, yeah, right. So if your life feels in order, then it's much easier to kind of order the other things in your life, or around you. So same thing, if you've got a cluttered session and you can't remember like where you put the vocal and you have to keep scrolling through the page for hours on end to try and find it, that sort of thing. So it's important just to take some time to gain structure right, find out, that probably comes after this bit, but find out what it is you've received, listen to each part and put them in an order that you understand. So like it might be like I always have the drums at the top of the track and then the bass, and then so it's an order that makes sense to you, possibly some color coding as well, just to make everything just pop out, so just some housework for the session. Get your gain structures right. And then sort of have a look about if there is something you're going to put on the mix bus, what it might be, because you'll get a general, that's obviously an overall tone that you're going to present or start working towards with that. And then once that's in place, then that's there to mix into, know.
Do you want to just define mix bus for anyone that doesn't understand what that is?
Okay, so you've got all your various stems, all your channels, they'll all be feeding through down to one stereo output, which is your final balance. So that's where everything comes to. So you'll route everything, your drums, bass, guitars, whatever it may be, they'll be all routed to your mix bus, which is the final stereo output. And on that, you could put an overall EQ if you wanted. So if you just think the whole thing just sounds a bit dull, you could put a bit of lift on it, or vice versa, take out a bit of the opposite end, just to counteract that. Yeah,
cool. So you've got all your tracks in, got them nice and clean, color coded, and then what do you do after that?
Well, like I say, make sure the gain structure's right. So I've got some headroom to maneuver into. I'm not clipping everything through the mix bus. But again, I think it's very unwise to do an approach where, right, I'm going to mute everything, I'm just going to listen to the drums and get them working. And then it's like, because a mix everything has to work together in the context of all the other parts. So if you do that and then you suddenly bring the drum back in and you start messing with the whole thing. So it's kind of just absorbing, like I said, you absorb where the tracks got to anyway, and what is it about it that's working and what is it about it that's not necessarily working. And you've got to keep sight of the things that were already working, and it might just be simple things that you need to change to bring it out of itself, not like a whole reworking of the whole thing. And it might just be a case of like, well, the drums could pop out a bit more or something, and there's various ways of doing that. But it's important to, I've experienced this a lot in my gigging days, actually. Like turning up to a venue, you'd set up, and the sound guy would just be like, well, I can see drum kit, bass guitar, electric guitar, keyboards. I know what that is. And so far from the truth. He'd never even, or she had never heard us play, but instantly it was just like, right, give me a kick drum, and is EQing it to how they think it should be. And it's like, well, you haven't listened to us play a song yet.
Yeah.
You know, your approach is completely the wrong way around. And it's kind of like, I'm sort of trying to listen to how they're all sitting at, they're all at whatever gain I've set it all to, maybe like minus, I don't know, let's just say minus 10, or all of them minus 10, just so I've got lots of headroom, and just listen to them. And there might be a case of like, well, okay, the kick drum should just come out a little bit here, the vocalness needs to pop out a bit more, or whatever, but I wouldn't go, right, okay, here we have, I've got the drums, right, I'm going to start work on the drums.
Yeah,
or whatever. You just need to establish what it is that is and isn't working about it first. And then, like I say, little moves. And then, like I say, if I do a little move, and I have to be disciplined with myself, because you can just like go, oh my God, it's like 8 hours has just gone. I haven't moved from this chair. And that's really dangerous. I think if I do a little move, like half an hour, set a little stopwatch and just go make a cup of tea, come back, double check that works. I do a lot of A/Bing with, also with different, with, how the monitor mix was, how it's now sounding, now I've played with it. And it's not a bad thing to admit to yourself that you've made it worse. Because you can, with the beauty of computers, you can undo, you can go backwards, as long as you keep saving sessions under new names, today's date at 5 o'clock, whatever it might be, just so you can go, do you know what? I'm happy to put my hand up and go, the last hour has made it worse, so I'm going to go backwards. But it doesn't mean it's a waste of time. It means you scratch that itch, and you now know that move was not the right thing to do. So that's a good thing. And one thing actually I forgot to say, in the beginning of the whole process, really wise to do what I call calibrating your ears. So listen to a piece of music that you know and love. You hope you love, but inside out, that this piece of music translates on my headphones, my speakers, the car, all the different things that you listen to, how it translates. So your ears are ready for that sort of, it knows like relatively like, okay, well, I know that these headphones are quite bright. So, so when you turn on the mix, you instantly then go, oh, wow, this is quite a lot more bassy, or whatever it is, compared to a piece of music that I do know, and I know how it should pop out the speakers. So therefore, if I want it to sound more poppy like that, there's X, Y, and Z I need to do to this. And there's so calibrating your ears at the beginning of the day is very, very important.
That's such a good point, actually. I never thought about that or starting a session that way. And like you said, I guess that would be a kind of quicker way to find things that pop out straight away. So that sounds like a really good tip. So one thing I wanted to talk about was plugins. So I mean, so many people get caught up in having a bunch of different plugins for a lot of things. But how important would you say having the right set of plugins is, or is it, I guess it's more about the usage.
Yeah. I mean, it's always nice to have the options should you need them.
Yeah.
However, I do think there's a lot to be said for, certainly in the production world as well, like being limited does allow more invention.
Yes.
And sometimes you just don't want the invention. You just want the compressor that does you want it to do. But if you've just gone out and bought all the plugins in the world, you won't know where to start.
Yeah.
So everyone has their plugs that they like and they use. And it's interesting when people do send me their sessions for me to mix. And I'm like, oh, okay, use that. I've never used that before. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. But yeah, so I think there's a balance to be met, because you obviously need significant tools that can do some good stuff. Like, so, there might be an EQ that is quite broad and sort of colourful, as it were. And then there's another EQ that you need to just be quite surgical. And two different EQs would do to two different complete things. But I think having 10 different EQs that are quite surgical and 10 that are all quite colourful, I think the colourful ones may be less so a problem. It might be quite nice because they're all different colours, as it were. But they've all got the different ranges. So, but you don't need 10 that are all surgical. I don't think, because you just want to zoom in on a problem frequency and either boost it or get rid of it, and so you don't need a million, you don't know where to start. That's the thing. If I click plugins and suddenly this list comes up and it falls off the bottom of the screen, I don't, it's too many there to choose from. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
And quite often, so I just have my ones that I love and I know what they're going to do. And every now and then, if I feel like I've got time on my hands, I'm sort of like experiment with a new one. But
Yeah.
I do think limiting yourself to a point definitely can be productive, because otherwise you just waste so much time.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, that makes sense. So, one thing I wanted to ask you about how you check your mixes, is there like a variety of different speakers that you use, or is there a kind of favorite way that you'll check your mix?
Yeah, I've got a radio, I've got a Sonos, I've got Oratones, and then I've got the classic NS10s, and then I've got a pair of Focals. What are they? Trios, I think they're called.
Okay.
I'm not very good with model numbers and things like that. I'm probably the world's worst at all that. You go to these producer conventions and they're like, oh, if you've got the D1, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, which one's that? Is that the one with the big knob on it? I'm not really, I'm not geeky like that, I'm afraid. I've got a lot of different speakers setups, just to kind of keep flicking through, because also, like, if you've got the trios, are definitely they're incredible speakers, but they're like, it's almost like they're too good. Like, it's like at times they're good to make sure that there is bass in there and it's all kind of working. Maybe at the end of the day the A&R come in and you can just crank it through the Focals, but certainly for things like getting a vocal level right or something, I'll be more drawn to the Oratones or something like that, because you're not letting the bass tones aren't clouding the vocal that way, and they're only clouding the vocal in my room or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So every room has their own acoustic character. So the Oratones are much more like what it would be on a laptop or something. So it's like I just want to hear the main details in the track being heard, that I want to be heard at that point. Is it the guitar lick or is it the vocal or whatever? That way I can tell that, and obviously there's a radio again, so that's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then the Sonos, I've got just a Sonos One, which is obviously a mono speaker, and it has some sort of way that it sums the stereo down to mono. So it's important as well to just try that, because there's a lot of people that listen to it, and myself included. At home, I've got Sonos Ones everywhere. Yeah. Just because a bit of, when we did cooking, you just want some background music, and it's perfect for that. So I get it, So yes, I do have an array, and actually, I'm really enjoying mixing on my headphones as well at the moment, which I'm having to do at the moment because I haven't got my setup here at home. Yeah, and they definitely give a new perspective, and actually, I'm loving getting a mix to a certain point just with the headphones, and then sort of transferring. So because then obviously you take out the room characteristics that way.
Yeah, for sure. So before I go on to a few questions that we got submitted in for you, I wanted to ask you, what is your most favorite thing about what you do as a producer and a mix engineer? What do you love?
Wow. Well, it's not a real job, is it? It's like no. I'm going to rephrase that. I can never see myself. What I mean by a real job is sitting by a desk 9 to 5. I don't know. Like it can be quite, if you're just purely mixing, I think you could be quite isolated and sat in a room by yourself, and you do spend a lot of time longer than 9 to 5. So I do try to avoid just purely doing that personally. What I love about my job as a whole is that is definitely part of it, but I love to keep it varied. So if we've got a new act, I'd go and see them live. So lots of gigs, and going, recently, I took a road trip to Bristol to see a band just to go and hang out in their space. And I think that's so important from a production point of view, is to absorb the artist, who they are, where they come from, that sort of thing. Yeah. Don't just meet them for the first time in the studio, because they're going to be a bit nervous probably, and you don't gauge who they are. So that sort of thing. And I just like, it's someone said to me, it's like, you kind of just like live your job, don't you? It's like, yeah, it's like, I don't clock off at 5. I'm just doing it.
Yeah.
But I love it. I love going to gigs. I love meeting new people. I love talking music. So that's why I say, I would say it's not a real job. I mean, a 9 to 5 sitting at a desk where I just have this image of people just looking at the clock. That's not me. Same time,
Yeah.
I don't want to stay in the studio till the early hours. I do think it is important to have some time away because that keeps you enthused for the time you are on it. So like I was just saying, like right now, I mean, don't get me wrong, it is getting like Groundhog Day right now, but I'm able to do some DIY, which is something so I don't know how to do DIY. I'm going to learn. And that's what I made. I made a carrot cake for the first time in my entire life the day, but that kind of makes me enthused. Thank you. And it was off the chart as well. I'm being really honest with you. Very
impressive.
I found a very good recipe. So it's good to do other things to keep you enthused for when you go back. I mean, God knows I have had a period in my life where I didn't want to listen to music. I couldn't do it. And that sounds terrible. But I got to a point I'd worked myself up so much about it. Right. Okay.
Yeah. Go on.
So yeah, it's important to acknowledge that and to step away and sort of and when that sort of like want to put on a new album or whatever it is comes back, it's exciting because you're just like, oh, thank God I haven't lost it forever.
Yeah.
But you just that comes from just being in the studio 24/7, and I think that's a really dangerous thing to do. And I think often people think, just going to stay here for a few more hours and we can nail this. I just think, no, you'll nail it in 5 minutes tomorrow morning. You genuinely will. I will anyway. I just know that right now we'll be here for hours messing the whole thing up because our ears are tired and we're tired and there's no point being here. So, and I'm a dad now and stuff. So it's like, I can't do that anyway.
Yeah. No, it's good to have those boundaries, I guess. What would you say is the biggest challenge for you?
I think it is that balance for me. I think, working balance, and also like, my process is changing a little bit to allow for, like I say, being a dad and avoidance of the, of finding myself in that sort of, music loathing fug that I got myself into. Do you know what I mean? Because I was just doing too much and trying to do too much. And actually right now, like I'm learning to let go a little bit and working on more. We had the question earlier about like, what's the beauty of, or what's good about doing it yourself over someone else. And like, I'm having to just let go more and put more faith in other people for the whole process, or part of the production, mixing, everything, just so that I'm not flogging myself trying to do everything. I mean, I remember doing the first Alt J record, I was the mixer, producer, engineer, everything. It was just me and them, but now I just don't have it in me to do that. I really enjoy having trusted people around me, having a quality engineer with me, so that I can focus on the artist and what we're capturing more, basically. And also, keep tabs on, go home and make a carrot cake. I think that's really important.
Oh, definitely. I wouldn't say no to a carrot cake. Yeah, no, that's all. It's very true to take that time away and have the right balance. So yeah, we've got a few questions from around the world for you. So we have a question from Robin Lovecchio from LA. So she asked, how do you train your ears?
How do you train your ears?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a lot of listening, I suppose, but trying to understand what it is you're listening to. And I don't think it comes overnight, For example, I don't know, training your ears. I think it is, you just got to listen to various things and try and work out what it is that's in that source material that's creating that sound. So when I was working on my production skills, or still am, I mean, I would say you never stop, by the way. You do not, I think the day someone goes, do you know what, I know everything there is to know, that's when their career is up the swelling. Because, it's forever mutating. So you always got things to learn and develop. But, like to put it So basically, for example, when I was working at Abbey Road, we were doing lots of orchestras all the time. It wasn't rock and roll there. It was orchestras and film scores and things like that. And just understanding more, I mean, I come from quite a musical background anyway, but just more that, okay, that's a really lovely, rich tone that's coming out on the strings. And then you understand, put it basically, that's the double bass section, that sort of thing. You see, you can learn that way. And then overall, again, it's like I said about calibrating your ears at the beginning of the day. Listen to a piece of music that you know and you understand how it's going to translate through whatever speakers you've got. And then that way, then you can then listen to something else and go, well, how do they differ? And try and establish why they differ. It doesn't mean one's right or wrong, by the way, but it just means you have a benchmark.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to understand what it is that's, making them sound like they do. And if you can, have a multi-track session obviously in front of you, then that's one way of breaking it down, muting everything and just having one thing. It's like, oh, okay, that's where the bass end is coming from or whatever. But you just need that time to search what it is that's in that final product that you're listening to.
Cool. And we have a question from Molly Voulaire from London. So she asked, what technique do you wish you'd learned when you started? I
think it's a lot of the things I've been talking about. It's more that sort of ability to kind of, I don't want to say communicate because I feel like my communication's always been good. It's more delegate. Ability to delegate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sort of be slightly less of a control freak. Because actually, like I said, I think, yeah, good. Do you agree with me? Okay.
Oh, yeah. No, I think that's excellent advice. I mean, not only with mixing and production, but I think in almost every area in life, like if I just completely blanket this, I think anytime you try and control every single aspect, you just end up kind of working yourself to the ground, and then there's kind of no room to grow from there because you can't keep always doing everything all of the time.
Exactly. And again, it opens up the doors to fresh ways of thinking, which we alluded to right at the beginning. Yeah. Is that, to an element, so, no one else is going to do something exactly like you would. And actually, so therefore, if they did do exactly like you're in effect like making a clone of yourself, therefore saving yourself some time, and some energy, but someone approaching something in a slightly different way can open the door to a fresh way of thinking that could be exciting. And it's being able to let go of the fact it's like, well, they came up with that idea, or whatever, like this, therefore they've had input in this, but that's cool. It's a collaboration, it's a collaborative thing. So it's not a problem. And, it's just got to embrace that, I think, and it's very important to do that. It's so exciting as well when it happens. It's just like, wow, didn't think about doing it that way, but that's very, very cool, But like I said, we've also alluded to the opposite to that, where it can be like, I didn't think about doing it that way because it's rubbish.
Yeah.
You have to, but you have to take the rough with the smooth, and that's something to learn, isn't it?
For sure. So last question was from Gabby Brown from Sydney. So she asked, do you have any favourite affordable plugins?
Favourite affordable ones? Yeah.
I don't know what affordable means, but...
Yeah, depends what your price bracket is. I mean, I've got one of my favourite free ones is Isotype Vinyl.
Oh,
free.
Cool.
I think it's brilliant. It's lovely. What else? Good question. I mean, I like the things that kind of warp sounds and stuff like that. There's a good, actually, again, I don't know what it's called. I just know what it does. Let me just dial it up. Hang on.
Okay.
I can't because I'm recording.
That's all right.
Yeah, it's basically, again, it's just another sort of old school mutator. So it's sort of like a cassette tape emulator sort of thing.
Oh, right.
It's got lots of different sort of, because I'm just a big fan of that, the sort of like distortions and saturation you can get from those sort of things. And some of them, they're not very expensive. So that's the thing. And also, this plugin doesn't do anything to the sound or anything like that, but it has made my life a lot different. Is what we're actually subsequently using right now for this interview, Audio Movers. It means that you can literally send a full, in real time, full res mix to whoever you're mixing so they can listen remotely. And that is going to, discovered it because of lockdown, but I think lockdown or no lockdown, I'll be using this in the future. So if I'm working with a band who are all based in the other side of the country, rather than them all having to traipse down and carbon footprint and whatever down to my studio, I can just send them a link and they can hear in real time what I'm doing.
That's amazing. Yeah. I'm going to have
really,
to get
really
on
amazing.
that too.
And
I think, yeah.
It's really, really good. And also you have a chat room, what it is, Zoom or whatever. So you'll have the chat room happening while they're hearing the mix as well. Mm-hmm. And because there's always an inevitable time lag a little bit, everyone allows each other's time to talk, rather than if you're in the studio, you can talk over each other sometimes. So you really do get to the finishing line very efficiently. I think it's brilliant. So
yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, that's really good and really topical as well. So I think that's a good one. It's a good one. So thanks so much, Charlie. I think we've kind of got through different aspects of what mixing is and also through a few questions. So thank you for your time.
Great.
And
thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
What else do you have planned for today? Any more cakes on the cards?
No, not cakes today. I'm going to put in some floating shelves.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
So DIY all the way.
Very good. Have you got, last time I did that, I used something called butterfly clips or something for the first time, and it was amazing, actually.
Uh-huh. Oh, great. Well, I'm going to make them look like there's no support, that they are literally just floating in midair. That's the idea. So I've been watching lots of online tutorials and things like that. So now it's my turn to give it a go and royally mess it up, no doubt. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
You'll be all right. Sounds good.
Fingers
Sounds
crossed.
good. Yeah. All right. Well, enjoy your DIY, Charlie, and have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And you.
Bye.
Cheers.